Acadia National Park is a 49,075-acre park located sort of in that middle section of the U.S. state of Maine's coastline. It protects roughly half of Mount Desert Island, which is the 6th largest island in the contiguous United States and a fascinating place to visit. See, I've wanted to come to Acadia for years as it was always towards the top of my national park bucket list. It seemed to me like one of the best examples of a park which combined exceptional natural scenery and awesome creative hiking trails. In the middle of October 2024, I hopped on the chance to finally make that a reality, spending 48 hours in what I can now confidently say is one of the best national parks east of the Mississippi River. I'm actually pretty late to making this video as I've been caught up with loads of other travel opportunities, but at last I'm excited to showcase all of what makes Acadia such a unique gem. We began stupid early on day one in order to experience one of the park's many claims to fame, which is being the first place in the country to see the sunrise from October 7th to March 6th. Since our trip happened to line up perfectly with the start of this, I figured we kinda had to do this even if it were uncomfortable having to get up so early and endure the freezing cold Maine air. In addition to it being the first, I've also heard from many that a sunrise at Acadia, specifically from its highest point, Cadillac Mountain, is one of the best you'll ever see. Unfortunately, it can be rather difficult to plan this into an itinerary at the park since there is a reservation lottery you must apply for ahead of your visit. More details on that can be found at recreation.gov, which I'll leave a link to in the description. We were glad to have lucked out on scoring one of these a few days in advance, but if you aren't successful, there is the option of walking 3.5 miles up Cadillac Mountain's access road. You could also hitchhike with another party or simply visit outside of sunrise, which is a much simpler permit to get your hands on. I have to say though, your efforts do pay off big time with a euphoric explosion of yellows and oranges hitting the sky. Being able to make this my first impression to Acadia was amazing too, since I wasn't exactly sure what the park was going to look like. I believe that to be the reason the landscape, consisting of variously sized islands dotting the waters around Mount Desert Island, as well as the lush forestry leading down to the coastline, made such an impression on me. While researching for this video, I was shocked to learn that Cadillac Mountain stands just 1,530 feet tall, despite the fact that you feel much higher than that. Though it was probably just my expectations deceiving me, since remember, it is a mountain right along the east coast. Cadillac is still the tallest mountain on the country's eastern seaboard. Low 30s with that wind chill. Oh my god, that was one of the coldest things I've ever felt. My face is so frozen, but that was definitely an amazing sunrise. Definitely the best I've ever seen. Not to outdo Cadillac Mountain, but another highlight from my time in Acadia was the Beehive Trail, which is the park's most popular hike. It's just 1.5 miles round trip, but there is 508 feet of elevation gain in the form of iron rungs and ladders. Alright, we are about to hike the Beehive Trail. This is a bucket list hike for me. It's not that long, but it's very steep uphill. I'm pretty excited. The loop starts at the Sand Beach parking lot, the namesake of which we'd return to on day 2 of our trip. Honestly, despite this trail's reputation and rating of hard on all trails, I really didn't find it to be so bad. Of course, if you have a fear of heights, you might want to stay away from this one, but there were only 1 or 2 sections that I personally found even a little bit scary. Instead, what these unique features were able to do for me was keep me engaged from start to finish. So much so that the Beehive Loop is one of my favorite short hikes I've ever experienced. A part of the reason for that may have had to do with the time of year I'd visited Acadia as well. We had planned to come during peak fall foliage. Amazingly, crowds were manageable despite the incredible conditions, even though I'd heard parking would be impossible just about everywhere in the park. And of course, having your own space is really important on a hike like Beehive, so that also made this particularly enjoyable for me. The views once you reach the summit of the mountain is nothing short of amazing, with the aforementioned yellows, oranges, and reds, but also evergreen trees that don't change at all, allowing those with color to appear more pronounced. Other defining features include Beehive Lagoon down at the bottom, which spills onto Sand Beach, which alone stands out seeing as it was my first time ever laying eyes on it. Then facing inland, you also have some impressive high peaks dominating their surroundings, even though, as we discussed earlier, they aren't anywhere near as tall as you might think. The way down to the trailhead is more of a simple gradual decline in elevation consisting of steps and switchbacks. For those who are interested in the scenery on offer at Beehive Summit but don't feel comfortable with the climb to the top, not to worry, there is an alternative option, which is to take what is supposed to be the second half of the loop both ways. Personally, I still think it would be well worth your time to do this. And just like that, we've made it to the summit of the Beehive Trail. Honestly, not that difficult at all. I think if you're afraid of heights, it's probably close to moderate, but nowhere near as terrifying as I think a lot of people make it out to be. I think the Precipice Trail that I do tomorrow will be a lot crazier. Following Beehive, we made our way 15 minutes north to the quaint town of Bar Harbor, just outside of park boundaries. This is what Pigeon Forge, Tennessee is to the Smoky Mountains, or what Jackson Hole is to the Grand Tetons, but in my opinion, Bar Harbor is one of the nicest tourist towns in the country. It not only retains that homey New England feel, but also has some great food, like Maine's signature lobster rolls that I'd heard so much about. I checked out a spot called Steuben's Lobster Pound, where rolls go for about $25 to $30 US. These things are crazy expensive, but worth splurging for the one time. I was told to get a lobster roll while in Maine, and I'm not usually a huge fan of seafood, but I'm really excited to try this. I like it. It's pretty damn good, actually. Wow. It's better than I expected. By this point in the day, a little bit of food couldn't change the fact that we were swamped from waking up so early, and we had also driven 7 hours to get here the day prior, so we made the decision to rest up at our hotel nearby and then continued on feeling recharged. Next up for us was the Jordan Pond Loop, another extremely visited spot in the park, virtually just as much as the Beehive Trail. Having said this, I wasn't overly excited for the 3.5-mile loop since I figured it would be a rather uneventful walk around a massive lake with little to no change in scenery. But that, my friends, is where I was wrong, because the perspectives you'd get were interesting and the trail was brilliantly designed. You're basically on this skinny little boardwalk most of the time, and the way it snakes its way in and out of the woods is awesome. It makes it so that the views of Jordan Pond never feel stale, but could it even when it's just this nice? I couldn't believe how clear the water was, on top of the fact that it was surrounded on all sides by hills and mountains. Namely, it's the south and north bubbles that create an impressive backdrop to the lake, and much to my surprise, there's an add-on to the trail a little over halfway through that tacks on probably half a mile at the most. Granted, it is steep, so it won't be for everyone, especially if you came to this spot for an easy, relaxing hike along the water. You know, for only being a mountain 700, 800 feet tall, this view is pretty spectacular. Like, holy cow. This was one of the things that amazed me most about Acadia, was just by climbing a little bit to elevations not even 750 feet high in this particular example, you're able to get such impressive views. I think it has something to do with the area's geology, as glaciers once carved valleys like the one Jordan Pond is located in, leaving behind occasional steep inclines, but other than that, most of the land here aside from the mountains is flat. And with the park containing so much water that you can see from above, you really are convinced that you're higher than you are, going back to what I said earlier when I was at Cadillac Mountain. This was such a spectacular overlook even with the bubble mountains out of view, but there's much more to be seen just by continuing a little bit further. You don't even have to get to the north bubble before other lakes and mountains reveal themselves, and better yet, there were tons of fall color visible right beside me. I spent a fair bit of time up here taking in the scenery before making my way back down to the boardwalk and finishing up the loop. I think when you combine the standard loop with South Bubble, this is one of the park's best hikes. It vastly exceeded my expectations, though I won't go as far as to say it's underrated since a lot of people do know about it. I'll go ahead and blame that on myself since I failed to give the spot the benefit of the doubt I probably should have. To wrap up day one, we made our way to one of the park's most iconic locations for sunset, and that would be the Bass Harbor Headlight. We made a pretty big detour to check this out, driving 40 minutes from Jordan Pond in what is only a medium-sized national park. Of course, 40 minutes in a place like Yellowstone or Death Valley is much more excusable. But the reason for this is you have to time a visit to Bass Harbor Headlight during low tide, so you can climb out onto the rocks and get that iconic view with both the lighthouse and rocky coastline in frame. Otherwise, trees block the lighthouse, and that can be pretty underwhelming, I imagine. This place is a zoo. There's a crazy line of cars up here, and we had to park kind of a ways on this really sketchy non-paved parking lot, and now we're walking up to the headlight right now. The lighting should be perfect. I'm really excited, but just keep that in mind if you're coming here. We didn't even intend to necessarily get here at sunset. It just worked that way. But yeah, it is packed. Overall though, crowds throughout this park in the fall have not been as bad as expected, so I'll take it that one of the spots is a zoo. It's okay. Once you reach the parking lot for the Bass Harbor Headlight, you can go one of two directions, either to the backside of the lighthouse, which is cool and a decent spot for sunset, but I didn't find the lighthouse to be all too impressive from up close. So that's when we decided to head to the front side down the rocks, and that's what really made Bass Harbor worth the visit. The way the light perfectly hit the lighthouse, which is positioned right atop this cliff above the water, was something out of a computer background screen. It wasn't your conventional sunset, but I think it was one of my favorites I've ever seen. Something about the atmosphere was magical, and I think it's because a view like this is just synonymous with Maine. Wow, really nice sunset. And between the sunset and the sunrise today, oh man, the sun's been popping off for us. It's been really, really cool. First day at Acadia is complete, and I have to say this park really is just as cool as I expected it to be. I've had a fantastic time. Tomorrow, we have a lot more on the agenda, so stay tuned. This is gonna be a fun video to look back and edit. We're up for day 2 of Acadia. Look at all the ice on this car. This is ridiculous. Just goes to show how cold it's been. Oh my gosh. To begin day 2 at the park, we made our way over to Thunder Hole, which is a highly visited feature on Acadia's coast. Essentially, when the tide is right and sends waves into this little channel, the air that escapes causes a thunderous noise, hence the name. The National Park Service recommends coming 1 to 2 hours before high tide for the best chance of hearing this roar, and that's exactly what we did. Unfortunately, despite the large number of people in attendance, there was no activity to be seen that morning, so we vouched to leave and return later for potentially better results. Okay, Thunderhole was kind of a bust, so we left early. We're gonna check it out again later. For now, I'm gonna spend my time hiking the Precipice Trail, which is one of the main incentives of coming to Acadia National Park. I'm so excited for this. It's gonna be definitely one of the scariest hikes I've ever done, but I'm ready to do it. The Precipice Trail is what I'd most accurately describe as the Beehive Trail on steroids. It has the same iron rungs and ladders, but the cliffs here are much more exposed and the route in general is much more difficult. Therefore, it's a hike that's been at the top of my bucket list for years, and indeed it was just as fun and as crazy as expected. It's listed as 2.5 miles round trip, though you can cut it a bit short by navigating the orange and black trail on the way back. But whatever you decide, it doesn't change the fact that you have 1,000 feet of elevation gain condensed into not even a mile. A good chunk of this is a steep rock scramble at the start, which was enjoyable in moderation, but it did get to a point where I was longing for something different. Still, there were sections I really enjoyed, like this little talus cave that you have to squeeze through. I'll be honest though, it pales in comparison to the unique features up ahead. So literally the first iron rung ladder portion is already quite a lot more difficult than the Beehive because this step is huge and this rock is past vertical. It's beyond vertical. So that has to be an indication as to how crazy this hike is going to be. I'll give you guys some updates as I go, but I'm excited as crap to try this. Literally the second you get to the iron rungs and railings, the trail keeps you engaged all the way until Precipice's summit. It's incredible just how creative they got when building this trail, as it feels more like an obstacle course or parkour course than a hike. There are many instances where you'll have to pull your entire body weight up a large step as the amount of rungs just isn't enough. On top of that, the walkways get increasingly narrow as you proceed along the route. There is always a rung available to hold onto when necessary, but it's transferring your hands between rungs while exposed that was scary to me. I'll suggest that anytime you traverse a particularly nerve-wracking section, take a break, catch your breath, and appreciate the views. While the scenery from the Beehive Trail is more beautiful in my opinion, this is nothing to scoff at. You still get a gorgeous look at some of the islands popping out of the water, alongside the steep vertical cliffs next to you, and of course the fall foliage was breathtaking. This section towards the end is one of the most photographed and iconic along the Precipice Trail, with the ladder right along this massive drop-off and great expansive views behind it. The hike overall hasn't been as difficult as I've expected so far, but some of the parts are as scary as they look. Like, oh my god, I just went up a ladder next to a cliff and that was definitely a lot. But the views are also getting a lot more impressive as well as we go on. It was this all the way until the end where I was pushed outside of my comfort zone, especially when things got so narrow that railings started to appear right beside my feet. Thing is, even if this becomes too much for you and you want to back out, you can't, because going down the ladders is far more difficult and dangerous than going up is. Just stay focused, watch your breath, and before you know it, you'll be clear of all things iron. We did it. Precipice Trail is complete. That was definitely a very fun hike. And honestly, collectively, was not as scary as I expected. If you watch my recent video of the Via Ferrata in West Virginia, even though you were secure, that is definitely a scarier experience if you've done that. But I'd even say like something like Angel's Landing is pretty comparable. Havasupai Trail is pretty comparable. I think I was expecting this to be the worst of all of them, but I'm very surprised that it's not. And I'm very happy about it because that was definitely pushing my limits in a few of the spots. It just wasn't consistently that bad, I didn't think. While I personally would have been down to tackle a little more of the crazy stuff, it doesn't matter who you are, you can't help but feel rewarded when you make it. And the view is also more open and impressive than ever, so be sure to look around and appreciate it for a while. The scenery is consistently stunning the rest of the way back as well, especially as you gradually lose elevation on the slanted rock face. Look the other way occasionally to get a nice clear look of Cadillac Mountain and a large pond down below. Here's probably the clearest view I've gotten of Cadillac Mountain while I've been here in Acadia National Park. It's really cool to think that yesterday morning we were on top of that thing, and it's awesome that they do have a road to get to the summit. Very nice. It's genuinely so pretty, and then about halfway to the bottom, the trail splits, and this is when I diverted from the standard route for a shorter journey back to the parking lot. Enjoy how well designed this is despite not being traditional route, between all the steps carved into rock and the healthy balance between wooded and exposed areas. I took the time to think about what I just experienced on the Precipice Trail and approximately where it stacks up when compared to my other favorite hikes in the eastern United States. And I think due to the adrenaline and uniqueness on offer, this is certainly top 3 for me. What an absolutely incredible signature trail for a national park. Once we finished, we stopped off at the Sand Beach parking lot from yesterday, this time to actually experience Sand Beach itself. There's a short walk to get there, and upon first glance, I was shocked that we were still in Maine. This is a stark contrast to the rocky coastline I'd seen up to that point, and adds to the diversity of Acadia National Park. Additionally, the water couldn't have been more clear. Like, look at the color. I must have spent a half an hour just getting pictures and videos here. It was shockingly gorgeous. And then for an even better perspective, head onto the Great Head Trail at the far end of the beach. I did the whole 1.5 mile loop, but at minimum, I'd recommend climbing up a couple hundred feet until you reach this point here. Overlooking the beach with the backdrop of peak fall colors and hilly terrain is mesmerizing. And looking at the beach on its own, not its surroundings, but just the beach itself, does it not look like something out of the Caribbean? This was one of my favorite views in the park, and it's a wonder why more people don't talk about it. The rest of the Great Head Trail is okay at best, with decent views of the rocky shoreline, but that's about it. I did like how you'd switch from boardwalk to rock scrambling though. It was well done overall. Just don't prioritize this spot in favor of others in this video, as aside from the one point of interest, it's nothing to shout at. Afterwards, it was time to give Thunderhole a second chance, and this time we were encouraged by the fact that the walkway next to the formation was open. This time you'd at least be able to look into the inlet, and it was pretty cool seeing all of the moss that had formed along its edges. Though we still weren't overly impressed, there was more activity now than there was before, with the water sometimes reaching the mouth of Thunder Hole. When that happened, you'd get some of the iconic thunder sound, as well as a gentle explosion outward. I imagine this could be amazing if you went during the right time, as it's been recorded that water has exploded and reached heights of 40 feet here. That's something where if I came back to Acadia, I'd try and make a priority to see. But for us, the 2 times we came, Thunder Hole wasn't one of our favorite spots in the park. Next, same as yesterday, before making our way over to the other side of the national park, we made our obligatory stop in Bar Harbor, this time to walk around and see more of the shops rather than just grab lunch. That said, we did come across a really cool ice cream parlor called Mount Desert Island Ice Cream and figured we'd try it out. Got myself a flight. This looks crazy. Wanted to try as many flavors as possible because this place has quite a few unique ones. This is like a Maine wild blueberry flavor, cookies and sweet cream. One of these two is honey baked apple, and then also a Maine sea salt caramel. Oh, this is really good. This has like a chewy kind of texture to it, which I love. It reminds me a lot of Turkish ice cream. I doubt many of you have been to Turkey and tried authentic Turkish ice cream, but this was the only time I've had ice cream in the United States that tasted anything like it. The stretchy, chewy texture was something I absolutely loved, so Mount Desert Island ice cream shouldn't be missed in Bar Harbor. To wrap up our time in Acadia, we made our way back to the southern side of the park where the Bass Harbor headlight is located, but this time we wanted to do what is basically a 2 hikes in one sort of package. First, we'll talk about Beach Mountain Trail, which I think is the most underrated hike in the national park. At just 1.2 miles round trip with 360 feet of elevation gain, Beach Mountain isn't too difficult at all, and any uphill you will experience comes in the form of these fun and enjoyable rock climbs. The alpine forest you traverse for the majority of the route is gorgeous and never feels stale because of how the trail incorporates sporadic open views too. It all builds on itself until you reach the end, which is a picturesque fire tower at Beach Mountain's summit. This is located atop an 839-foot high mountain and, much to my amazement, was available to climb. And thank goodness for that, because the scenery is absolutely breathtaking from up here. We made it to the top of the Beach Mountain Fire Tower, and this is a really underrated spot. I'm not sure why it's not talked about more. It wasn't too much effort to get up here, and the views are really, really nice, pretty much panoramic as well. Very, very cool. You receive almost full 360-degree panoramic views that look out at mountains, lakes, and coast all at once. When I first saw this, I vividly recall not being able to distinguish the difference between the lakes and Atlantic Ocean because there's just that much water in the park. In a way, Beach Mountain's Fire Tower sort of encapsulates all of what Acadia has to offer in one single viewpoint, which I think is incredibly cool. But there's more to come as you head back down to the bottom and lose all the elevation you gained. Since this is a loop, you'll be traversing a new section of trail not yet seen along the outskirts of Beach Mountain. Here you'll get what I'd assume to be the best overlook in the park of Long Pond, which, as the name implies, is the longest pond in Acadia. I don't think my footage is able to remotely convey the sheer scale of this singular lake. It is stupid big, and directly behind it you're almost convinced the land is flooded as well because of this giant sound connected to the Atlantic Ocean. Absolutely amazing stuff, and this wholeheartedly convinced me that this was a must-do hike in the park. Right on the opposite end of the parking lot from the last hike we just did is my final trail in Acadia National Park. We're going to do the Canada Cliffs to Echo Lake Beach and then up Beach Cliff Trail, which has a few ladders as well. So this will be a nice conclusion to the park. The Canada Cliffs Beach Cliffs Loop is another hike I've heard very few people talk about, and I cannot for the life of me understand why. This is a nearly 2-mile loop that has a little bit of everything I'd come to expect from the park, hence why it made for such an excellent conclusion. The first half is pretty uninteresting compared to the second, but still contains gorgeous forestry and a blend of conventional dirt trail and boardwalk sections. It mainly serves as a way to get from point A to point B, the trailhead, down to Echo Lake Beach. Here, there's another parking lot you can go to if you'd like to experience this loop a different way, but it just worked best for me to combine the last 2 hikes I did into one. Echo Lake Beach is very different from the sand beach I'd visited earlier, since this is a freshwater lake as opposed to ocean. It's staffed with lifeguards from Memorial Day through Labor Day, as it's gained a reputation for being Acadia's best lake for swimming. Without that attribute, it's just okay at best from down here, so I didn't spend a lot of time before carrying on with my hike. This is where you merge with the beach cliff part of the trail, is where the fun stuff really begins. That said, it's also far and away the most difficult section, both in terms of how strenuous it is and how technical it is. Nearly 500 feet of elevation gain is packed into not even 0.4 miles of trail, and while a good chunk of that are steep steps carved into rock, you'll also be forced to navigate 4 ladders, which range in height from 8 to nearly 20 feet. I absolutely love when trails work in unique features such as this, as it makes an otherwise pleasant journey one that's also interesting and extremely memorable. Plus, with how steep the cliffs are in the area, ladders were absolutely necessary in order to get you back up to the top where the parking lot is. I especially love the final 2 since they're positioned back to back and surrounded on 3 sides by sheer cliff. From my experience, these climbs were considerably more tame than the Precipice Trail and probably even a little easier than the Beehive Trail as well. Don't be intimidated by these, most people should be able to clear them without much of a problem, and your efforts are also rewarded too, with some of my favorite views in the park at the top. The last section of trail takes its time to grant you different angles and perspectives of Echo Lake from the top of Beach Cliff. I can't even begin to describe how high and exposed you feel from up here, not to mention how expansive the views are, once again being able to see all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. Factor in some nice fall foliage and you've got yourself a banger end to a brilliantly designed hiking trail. Before I state my concluding thoughts on the park as a whole, one last thing to consider about the Beach Cliff portion of the trail is for those looking to see these spectacular views without tackling the ladders, you can easily access them by starting this hike in reverse and then looping back around to the parking lot when finished. Whatever you decide to do, try not to miss the scenery here, it really is spectacular. I had a great time on the entire loop, especially thanks to the ladders. I am forever impressed by how virtually every hike in Acadia is designed with creativity in mind.
Well, that's how you spend 48 hours in Acadia National Park. This place absolutely lived up to expectations. I had so much fun here. I'll have to give it some more thought, but it's absolutely in contention for my favorite national park out east. Highly recommend it, especially in the fall. These colors were great. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.